Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC episode 44 with licensed marriage and family therapist Shardae, Washington. Hello again, OTC listeners. Back again for another episode. I'm just going to jump straight into the intro for this episode. I'm bringing a talk that I had with Shardae, Washington, who is an LMFT that I've worked alongside in the past. And we talk about the concept of racial trauma and racial injustice. And, you know, I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure where to go with this. I mean, there's obviously so many things that need to be said about the mental health impacts of racial trauma that, I mean, I could fill weeks and weeks of episodes just off of that topic. And the reality is this is just one interview. This is just one conversation. And there's no way for that to even begin to adequately address, you know, this gigantic topic of racial injustice and racial trauma. And it's something that needs to be ongoing. And, you know, I talk about in the episode with her that, you know, yes, it's important that all of the things across our country and our globe are happening right now, but they need to keep happening in, you know, weeks from now, months from now, years from now. It needs to still be something that people are paying attention to and fighting the battle on. So I imagine some of you at this point may be thinking, oh God, another, you know, white person jumping on the bandwagon and trying to act like, you know, they're woke, you know. And let's face it, almost everything is reactionary, you know, whether it's our response to racial tension in America, genocide in another country, the climate crisis, or a natural disaster. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. That we, a lot of times, are very reactionary. We don't do something about it until it hits close to home or you know, moves us in some certain way. And, you know, even as I'm talking, you may be reaching to turn off this episode. You know, I hope that you don't, because I think these are important conversations and topics that we all need to face. And also, you know, I've got the microphone. It's my show. So if you don't like it, get your own damn podcast. Focus on something you want to. But I, like I said, I truly hope that you stay and listen, because it is such a huge conversation. It impacts all of us. And I start from a place of acknowledging white privilege and white fragility and trying to bring some awareness for myself and for those that are listening to this show, for, okay, how do we figure some of this stuff out? How do we talk about this? And how does it impact people? And the reality is we're not always going to get it right. I mean, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to say things that come out the wrong way, or, you know, really struggle in understanding somebody else. And I think the important part here is the intention, you know, wanting to come at this from a place of respect, but also understanding that I don't understand everything about this, but I'm trying to. I'm trying to make some changes in the way I approach things, whether that's just as a member of my community or as a therapist, and trying to show up, trying to take that next step from just awareness and then, okay, what do we do after that? And that's what I'm hoping to bring with some of this episode. And like I said, it's not a one-time thing. My hope is that it is an ongoing conversation and that it is a part of this project moving forward. So why am I talking about this? You know, why do an episode focusing on Black and brown communities and racial trauma. Why even talk about it at all? And the reason is, as a therapist, a lot of what I do is to sit with people and validate what they've been through and support them in processing through that, and often some of the worst things that have ever happened to them. And it's interesting, there's actually this forest in Utah. It's the Pando Forest. It's in the Fish Lake National Forest out in Utah. And it's a particular grove of aspen trees. And it covers over like 106 acres. I mean, it's huge. They're estimated about 80,000 years old. But when they actually researched it, they discovered it's actually one organism. It is all one root ball, but it looks like an entire forest made up of different trees. And that idea with humanity of we are all one race, we are all one collective. And, especially for those that ascribe to a Christian worldview, that idea of in 1 Corinthians, they talk about the body of Christ, that idea that, that one part of the body can't say to another part of the body, like, oh, you don't matter, and I'm going to get rid of you, or I don't need to use you, or you're not worth as much. And that concept applies universally to all of us. That's why I wanted to do this episode, is to address some of that and give some small platform for that message to be heard. That's my take. So just a little bit about my guest, Shardae. Shardae is amazing. So she is a compassionate and trusted licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Virginia. She's also board-approved supervisor, and she got her master's degree from Drexel University for marriage and family therapy. And she works providing outpatient therapy in the Richmond, Virginia area, as well as in-home therapy and supervision for a school-based agency. And she focuses on building and strengthening relationships between couples, families and adolescents, and parental subsystems, which is her passion. And she can be found at swashingtoncounseling.com. I hope you take something from it, like I always say, and thanks for checking it out. Well, I have on the show today Shardae Washington, LMFT extraordinaire. So thank you, Shardae.
Thank you. I'm so happy and appreciative for the invite.
Definitely. And I got to start off by apologizing. So for listeners, Shardae and I actually recorded an episode. I think it was like at the beginning, like 2 years ago, basically. And I experienced a horrible tech issue, and all on my end. And the fault lies with me in terms of not being on the ball and doing this sooner. So thank you for being gracious enough and brave enough to try it again.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Just keeping me in mind and invite me on the show. It's an honor, honestly.
Thank you. Yeah, it's obviously such a huge topic, just focusing on mental health, period, but especially with everything that's been going on. And yeah, I guess why don't we start with tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we can kind of start to get into some of the terminology and some of those things. Yeah.
Okay. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist based out of Richmond, Virginia. Full-time, I am a supervisor for a program called Therapeutic Interventions. So we work in the schools overseeing that program. And then I also have my own private practice also in the area. So I work with a lot of families, mostly with African American couples and families working through relationship issues as well as mental health issues as well.
And yeah, for listeners, I mean, you and I have worked together in the past, and you have talked about and done trainings in terms of mental health in Black community and just different things that people need to be aware of, that those communities face and deal with, and how we can make changes with that. So, yeah. What I was saying is kind of starting with terminology, that idea of, language is important. Mm-hmm. What do you typically go over?
As far as being called either African American or being Black, I mean, I personally don't, I try to stay away from saying African American because I acknowledge that not every person who is Black is African American. They might be, from a Caribbean descent. So I personally use the word Black and brown or people of color.
Okay. And I think that more so recently, it seems like of like POC, BIPOC, the Black, Indigenous, people of color. Yeah. I'll speak to my own anxiety. I was talking with you yesterday about it's so strange that I experienced more anxiety preparing to talk to you and talk about the subject of race and racial tension and mental health than I have with a lot, like reaching out to some pretty big name guests to hopefully have them on my show. I experienced more anxiety about talking about this.
Yeah.
And I think so many people are like, ooh, like, race, religion, politics, sex, like those are things we were taught, like you don't talk about those.
Exactly. It's an uncomfortable conversation. Absolutely.
Sure. And in the work that you do, what have you seen, especially over the last couple of weeks? What's been your experience as both part of that community and as a mental health professional, part of that community?
Right. Well, I guess from a standpoint, from a therapist view, I've encountered a lot of clients that are experiencing a lot of symptoms connected to what we call racial trauma. And so there's the symptoms of depression, anxiety. The word I've heard the most often is I'm tired. I am exhausted. I am tired. And that is in relationship to the racial tension that we're experiencing, the protests, the police shootings with African American, Black, people of color, men, however you want to name it. But the attack on the community, because that's really how it feels. That once again, this is happening and people they're just tired. They're exhausted.
Yeah. And do you see almost, I think you and I were talking yesterday about, the powder keg kind of that clearly this has gone on for so long. But then the COVID-19 and the quarantine, I think really kind of primed it, and everybody being stuck at home. And then all of the events over the last, especially the last month, I would say, it seemed like it really sparked it.
Right. Well, the thing is, this has been going on for the longest. And I think with everything that has happened over the past few months, it's just allowed white people to see that this was real. But for us, this has always happened. And honestly, we've never expected anyone to have any accountability for it. There hasn't usually been any repercussions of these police shootings with Black men. And I think between COVID, everybody being stuck in the house, the fear around that, it just made it a perfect storm. And I kind of, look at it as a domino effect between the various Black people who have been shot, between Ahmaud, I think it was like Breonna Taylor, and then you have George Floyd, and then what happened over the weekend with Rashard Brooks. I think everybody has just gotten to a space where it's just not tolerable anymore. And I think people are just in a place where they're open to hearing what things have been like for us for so long. I think people have been more open to being allies. And I think this protest and this civil rights movement that we're in right now, it's different. It's different than the ones from the 60s. It's different from protests that, took place in like Vietnam. It just feels so much different. It feels bigger. And we can see that it has made some impact. People are now being held accountable. There's finally people that are open to hearing the racial trauma stories that we have. So I think the perfect storm was created over this period for us to get to this point. And it's unfortunate that it had to go to this length. But on some level, I'm extremely hopeful, finally, that there will be some level of change.
Yeah, and I was going to echo that of almost like, obviously you don't wish for it to get to that point where it's like, okay, finally we're waking up, and but at the same time of finally it seems like there's hope, there's something being done about it, and it seemed to follow that COVID quarantine like global impact.
Yeah.
Where you're seeing the protests in other countries in solidarity and kind of standing up to some of this. With clients, have you found that they're seeing that as well? I know you said the tired and the exhausted, but are you seeing any of the there's some hope in this also, or I don't even want to get my hopes up because I've been through this before?
Right. I think it's a mixture of both. I think what I've encountered has been the seed of hope and seeing that there's accountability. And so what might not have been there back in January or December, that hope might not have been there, I'm starting to see it grow now. But there's always still this sense of, okay, let's wait for the other shoe to drop, or let's see if this sticks. There is that fear that perhaps all of this has been done in vain. And so I think most people are going to have to see this play out to see whether or not, this will actually create the change we're looking for, or if it was just, this is what it is for right now. But I think we have a mixture of feelings right now, and we just need to see what happens.
So it made me wonder if you see any pattern in terms of age, where I could see even older clients that are like, I've been through this before. I was there for this protest, or I remember hearing somebody on New York Times columnist talk about, well, I thought it was going to change with Rodney King. I thought it was going to change here and Trayvon Martin. And have you seen anything like that?
I have. I think I don't notice technically a difference in age I know that I've heard a lot that, this is the young people's fight. Um, and that they are proud to see as many people protesting. But yeah, I definitely feel that most people I've spoken to feel like, on one hand, this feels different, but we've seen this before. We've seen something like this before. We've gone through periods of protest. But overall, I think everybody I've spoken to, have done sessions with, everybody has said something's different about this. Something is different. And I really think it's mostly because we have so many people working together. The diversity, when you look out into the protests, I mean, it is something that did not happen in the 60s. When in the 60s, it was mostly Black people, and it was unfathomable that as many white people would be protesting. And to see it happening today, I mean, it is I'm really proud. I'm really proud. So I think a lot of people recognize that there is something different about this than it has been in the past. But of course, we're still on guard. We're on edge. We're cautious.
Do you see rise in anxiety? I know you mentioned like racial trauma. Are there particular diagnoses that you're seeing more of during this time?
Definitely. More depression. And honestly, I think that might be coupled with the being inside for so long and COVID. But also, I think it's just I think it's expressed through anger. I definitely see more anxiety. It is, and even with myself, I see the anxiety, especially going outside of the house, especially encountering other people. I think that in this period, there's a heightened sense of just hypervigilance. Like I notice different things that I might not have really put a whole bunch of emphasis on several months ago, because everything just feels so raw. Yeah, so definitely a lot of anxiety, definitely a lot of hypersensitivity, even to the ideas of feeling threatened or feeling like people are looking at you a certain way. I think everybody's just kind of on edge right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it made me think of there's a term, allostatic overload, where kind of talks about just that accumulative effect without break or relief, the impact that can have on a person and their system. Kind of like we were saying of like, the quarantine and everybody being on edge from that, and especially recently with all of the news stories and everything happening with the violence, and just it almost became this like morbid joke of like, yeah, what's going to be next, murder bees, or and just that really wearing people down.
Yeah. I completely agree. This has been probably the most bizarre, honestly, probably 3 years, 3 years of just every day it is something new. But 2020 by itself takes the cake for me. But again, re-emphasizing that these deaths, these murders, the racial tension that we've experienced is not new. And so think a lot of Black people are walking, even before this, we're walking around with racial trauma because of our experiences. And the other piece is nobody believed us before now. So these were only conversations we would have amongst ourselves, and the lack of safety and truly being or feeling like we can talk about different things really also has an impact on how we've been able to kind of cope with these type of situations. A part of me is a little relieved. It's like, okay, finally, it's seen, it's on video. Y'all can see that this is happening, and now the conversations are happening. So I think it's just more amplified and it's more visible that this is what we are experiencing now.
Sure. Yeah, I could completely see the shift. I mean, even the term white fragility, like 10 years ago, even like wasn't even a real concept. Like, and it made me think of gaslighting and almost like a domestic violence type of, well, you're crazy. That's not happening.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be honest and say, yeah, the white fragility, the white privilege that I have, especially as a white male, coming to understand the term and really look at like, no, yeah, I'm a part of that just by nature of being a part of the community. So you're saying you feel like you've seen a little bit of a shift.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I definitely see a shift. I think people are actually having that conversation of the white privilege and what that means. And it's put on the table. All of the things that, we have always been afraid as a country to address and to deal with and to say and put on the table, it's now putting it on the table. And, I think like we talked about yesterday, everybody's I've noticed different white people kind of dealing with their white privilege differently now, in the sense of I've encountered people who still feel like it doesn't exist, or that they don't feel like they have benefited off of being white or being male or being of any, majority group of people. And then I've encountered, other white people who, they might come up. I had one of my cousins, he told me recently, he was like, I had a white guy come up to me and just absolutely apologize for his white privilege. And we all were baffled, like, really? Oh my God. But, I think people are opening up to it. But I don't need anybody to apologize for their white privilege. Like, this isn't something that, you created. I think this was how our country has been built. It was designed to be this way. And so although it's there, I need people to just acknowledge that it's there and acknowledge the impact that it has and has woven into our country. Like how it has been a major building block of how our country is ran. And so I don't need apologies at all. I just need people to understand that this is impacting other races, and we need to either reform our systems to make it so that everybody has an equally fighting chance, or we need to do something else. But
I can see the, again, some of the gaslighting, as a white male, sure, if I'm, in that privileged community, I don't want to give that up. I don't like what happens if I give that up? If I acknowledge like, yeah, things are not quite equal. No. And I can see also, yeah, I am a blue collar, I have worked hard for what I have. How dare you, insinuate that I am racist or that I have played a part in this. And I think definitely that shift of, I was talking with you yesterday about some of the social pressure of, making a statement, of, being woke and acknowledging white privilege and white fragility. And I think, just the impact of even a person having their experience validated can have such a huge impact on any trauma.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Like we've been saying, it's not something that's new for you. And have you seen some of that in the tiredness of like, welcome to the party. Like, glad you finally arrived. What took you so long?
Yeah, I have. That is a piece of it. The other piece is, there are some Black people that are kind of tired of educating or repeating the same things, like we've been hollering about this forever. And so now it's like, okay, now y'all want to listen. And we're like, okay, here we go again. Now we got to re-educate. Like that gets exhausting. It gets exhausting. But I also feel like it is our duty to explain, because you would not know what happens on a daily basis to someone who is, Black, unless you've either, watched it happen, been a friend and was there, and you hear the stories. Like, if it doesn't happen to you regularly, then you're not going to know. So it is our duty to talk about it and to say it.
Yeah. And there's two things I wanted to go with that. The one being that some of the pushback on the white privilege, I think some of that struggle being, well, I don't, if I'm up against you for a job, I don't know typically who I'm up against. And, obviously with equal opportunity employment, like they're not going to tell you, oh, it's because of this, So I think we were saying in the retail world, it was an area that you a lot of times do see it come out. If I'm in a store and a person of color is in the store, the way that I would get treated would oftentimes be drastically different from how they were treated.
Right. Absolutely. And to, in another frame lens to put on the table is there are those that are fully aware that they have white privilege and they weaponize it, just like
Amy Cooper, sure.
Absolutely. And I think what's being videotaped more is those encounters. Those encounters where you are literally just living, minding your business, and someone feels it is their duty to take it upon themselves to confront you or to, say something or weaponize their white privilege to make sure that they punish you in some fashion. And the term recently has been a Karen. So Amy Cooper as the quote unquote Karens of the world have been doing that, which is also not new, but has been more so videotaped and posted, and people can see that this happens. So, I mean, there are many different ways to look at it. There are different people that do different things with it. But the reality at the end of the day is it is there. It is very real. You can either use it for good or you can continue to do what prior ancestors have done and either weaponize it to make sure you can maintain it or to ignore it. So,
yeah. Oh God. And the other thing, going back to what you were saying before, of being tired of having to constantly educate people, I have seen that some in the conversations that I've had over the last couple of weeks of and me trying to be sensitive to that of like, hey, if this is something you don't want to talk about because you're just talked out on it, or it's just too much, like, just say so. And I get that. I'm happy to, I don't want to be the sort of the token white guy who's like, I'm woke, I'm ready to talk about it. So you must want to talk about it all the time. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's something, all people can do, is just checking in on, hey, are you okay talking about this?
Right. Exactly. I think that is a big piece. I think relationship and discussion are one of the two biggest pieces of moving forward. I think that a lot of times although segregation is not legally happening, it is still happening. And we live in our little bubbles. We stay within our safe communities or our group of people. And a lot of times that could look like, your group, your friends are all white or they're all black, or even if you have a mixture, the conversations about race aren't happening. And so I think being able to have conversations and, fill the room, of course, and ask like, listen, how are you feeling about what's happening? If you don't feel like talking about it, fine. But ask, like, how is this impacting you? Tell me your stories. Like, what has happened? And being able to have those conversations with people and vice versa, I think is important. And I think we have not been doing enough of that. We had not been doing enough of that. I love that that's where we are now, but that needs to continue.
Sure. And I think going back to some of what you had said before of, it's not just, okay, it's on the tip of everybody's tongue right now. It's on everybody's social media right now. It still needs to be part of the conversation in a month or a week or whatever. And I was having a conversation this morning, just asking, have somebody in our life, in our circle, that they're an attorney and a professor. And I asked, do you have to do cultural competency training, as an attorney? Because for social workers and therapists, marriage and family therapists, it's, you at least have to have the class in grad program.
Right.
And that's sad in and of itself, that it's like, okay, I checked the box. Now give me my diploma.
Right. Yeah.
That idea of being willing as a counselor or social worker to talk about, hey, is this something that needs to be a part of the work that we're doing? Whether that's LGBTQ or, I was raised in the North, you were raised in the South, or, whatever it might be. It needs to be such an important part of it.
Absolutely. And being from a master's program from Drexel, the marriage and family therapy program emphasized the contextual factors almost to the degree that, sometimes I was like, oh my God, come on now. But it is so important, whether it's race, whether it's age, whether it's socioeconomic status, religion, like all of those things matter. And to be able to understand what, as a group, those expectations, those values are, but on an individual level, having those conversations with, like, how would you like to be, addressed, or, everybody's different. And being able to understand is great as a whole, but it also kind of will have a double-edged sword and you'll end up stereotyping. So it's great to have a broad view of what's happening, but it's also even more important for you to talk to individuals whether or not we all have the same values or they're different, having these conversations with individual people, whether or not it's about, whether, sexual preference or having conversations about religions, all the things you're the faux pas of the world, not supposed to talk about, but it's important.
You're listening to OTC episode 44 with Shardae Washington. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Would you like to talk to a counselor but can't find the time? Would you rather talk to someone from the comfort of your own home? If so, Parenting and Family Solutions is here to help. We now offer teletherapy to all clients who reside in the state of Pennsylvania. Using our secure portal, you can have a video session with your counselor using a laptop, desktop computer, or smartphone. Visit our website to learn more at www.parentfamilysolutions.com or give us a call at 717-602-5560 to see if teletherapy might be a good fit for you. Let us help you build a stronger family and a healthier you.
That idea that it's a lot of times out of, I think, fear and possibly some laziness of, I'm afraid to put my foot in my mouth. I'm afraid to use the wrong term. And then as the white guy, come off as, okay, I'm being racist by using the wrong term. And I think that's another concept, the idea of microaggressions, and you can have a racist moment and not be racist.
Right. Absolutely. For instance, this past weekend, one of my friends shared that she was in the grocery store. And so she's getting, some candy because she has a marketing event coming up. And there was a white gentleman behind her, and he asks her a very strange question. And I can't remember exactly the wording, but he basically implied that he asked her, did she get her stimulus check back? Which she was confused, like, why are you asking me that? And so it sends this message that he's assuming the only way she's buying all this stuff is because she got a stimulus check back. Not because maybe I can afford to buy these things, but the audacity, the lack of cultural awareness in some sense, as well as the insensitivity, but the audacity.
Yeah.
Just ask anybody that you don't know. Like, those microaggressions literally are the ones that happen every day. So we think of the encounters with the police, but honestly, the covert the whistle codings, the microaggressions we experience from people are probably, for me, more infuriating because they happen every day. Mm.
And I imagine you probably don't get this in your direct circles, but I mean, people push back on that of like, the millennial snowflake that cares so much about, the term that's used, or the, like we're watering everything down. Yeah. Like, how do you, I don't want to play devil's advocate and be like, yeah, how do you?
No, I think that's a good question. I think whoever so chooses to, feel like they need to be that cautious and aware, I think it's not a bad thing. I think those who are willing to ask the questions truly find out a lot more than those who don't or assume. Mm-hmm. So although I recognize that we are used to a certain way of things, clearly that way has not gotten us but so far.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say kudos to whoever is watering things down and is open to change.
Yeah, it's, again, in those relationships, the people that care enough will reach out, will check in, will, be willing to have some of those uncomfortable conversations.
Right.
And with going back to clinically with clients that, they've been experiencing some of this depression, some of this racial trauma, are there ways that you've been, okay, hey, this is what you need to do? These are some things that can help?
Yeah. I think telling one story means so much. When you provide people the space, the openness to kind of share their experience, share their stories, share their narratives, there's some level of relief and healing in that. It allows one to just be able to truly be themselves and say, this is my experience. I think as well as validating their experiences like you talked about earlier, and surrounding yourself with people that are willing to validate, willing to acknowledge, willing to listen, whether or not they're Black, they're white, whatever. Having that level of support is important. The other piece is what I try to do is to externalize the devaluation. And what I mean by that is there are so many messages that we are internalizing that reinforce this idea that we are less than, that we aren't as good or we aren't good enough. And to be able to separate those messages and what you're internalizing and helping you recognize that because somebody is, saying these things or doing these things, it does not mean that this is literally your self-worth. And working through that is important. The other thing that I think everybody's seeing now is just being able to re-challenge your anger and rechanneling it in healthy ways. So activism, helping out with the protests. There's a group here in Richmond. It's called PICF, Pulliam Innovative Consulting Firm. They have been getting donations from people and organizations and taking them to the protesters. So like water, literally everything, lights, batteries, whatever they use to, get gas, the tear gas out of your eyes. Like they've been packaging all this up and bringing those to the protesters.
Wow.
So any way that you can rechannel that anger in a healthy way is important. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you had said about those internal messages, obviously for anybody, I think that's a good exercise. Do you have them write that down? Do you have them, where did you get that? How did you come by that message?
Absolutely. A lot of processing. For younger kids, it's definitely a lot of journal writing and almost a way of therapy of externalizing and changing the language of how, they are writing their narrative and picking through like, okay, well, let's say they say, because they said this, that must mean I'm a loser. Okay, well, how about this? Because they said that, they sent a message that might translate as you being less than, but that's not who you are. What would you say you are? Helping them replace those things with other positive characteristics about themselves. And so it is a long process. I think that, because most African Americans, Black people of color, we come into this world and we're taught very early on that we are different. it is a lifelong battle of trying to externalize our own devaluation, constantly being aware of it, trying to work through it. It's always a work in progress every day.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there are times where I don't know that it's even possible for me as a white male to like try to conceptualize what would this be like if I was on the receiving end of it, if the world were like completely flipped, where, you know, white male was, you know, the minority and had to fight every day for this. I mean, you can just think of just the amount, that allostatic effect of those messages day in and day out.
Right. Yeah.
You had also talked about at points stepping away from the news or the social media. It's kind of been this double-edged sword of, yes, now we have footage, and that's a good thing. It's you know, mobilizing everybody or motivating everybody, but at the same time, it can have a somewhat negative effect.
Absolutely. Taking in all that information, watching especially the videos repeatedly, I think it reinforces the trauma. And so I definitely feel like taking breaks from all of it. The news, if you watch, you know, CNN or Fox, turning the TV off, turning the laptop off, not going on social media for a period of time, whether that is just an hour or a few days. I think it's important because when you're constantly taking in all of the horrific images, and when you are on social media, they're always having debates. Somebody will post something, and then there's this debate, or you'll see so many different things, whether it's good or bad. It's overload. Mm-hmm. And so human beings are not meant to have chronic stress. Our bodies were not built to handle that level of stress every day. Mm-hmm. And so we as a people have to work on finding things that are self-soothing, that can help us cope with all of these things a little bit better, you know, and you can see the level of chronic stress in families. When I do genograms, mm-hmm. I also take into account next questions about medical history. And I can start to thread how much stress a family has gone through just based on their mental health diagnoses, their health diagnoses, all of it. And so our bodies, our minds, our spirits, it can't take but so much. And so I think part of self-care needs to be turning everything off and just stepping away from it from time to time.
And you and I had talked about, I think, some of the impact of quarantine. It drove everything onto social media, that was our way of staying connected to people, which was good at points. But like you said, when it's some of the videos and a lot of the vitriol and people just arguing either side, and at points just stepping away from that. Do you also talk with parents about that, of, you know, hey, you may have to like turn the news off, or like don't be watching this, just like constant streaming for the kids? That could really, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. As well as monitoring what they're watching, because it is literally everywhere. I know a lot of kids end up on things like TikTok and all of those other platforms. And even on there, I mean, it's everywhere. So one of the things that, you know, working with parents around is limiting technology, limiting TV, getting the kids to just go outside, go play, be in the backyard, just do something else, as well as still having these conversations. Because kids, they know what's happening, but they might not be at an age where they can conceptualize truly what's going on. And so still having those conversations, but definitely removing them from limiting how much they're taking in from TV and social media.
And in terms of clients or even just general public in the white community, I hate to like separate it out like that, and but yeah, would there be any advice that you would give, or any things? I mean, we talked about having those real conversations. A lot of what I've heard is like, do your own research, like read some books, Google some stuff. The others that made me think of was the awareness isn't enough. Like we talk about that all the time, of like, that's the first step. That's half the battle, you know?
Absolutely. I think in preparing for a training I did earlier today and this, you know, I really did a lot of research, especially around our history. And not to say, you know, I didn't know about it before, but there are so many points that I don't even think I was aware of how America kind of came to be, and the different ways in which our systems were created in order to maintain power. So, yes, educating yourself, learning America's real history, not the ones they're teaching in our books that the kids get, the history books, the real history of America. And I think the biggest piece that I'm enjoying right now, yes, is the unity, but we need real reform. Laws need to be changed. Our systems need to be changed. I think that we have a lot of work to do. And so everybody needs to work together on this. And we need to figure out how we can move this country forward in a way that everybody has the same rights and the leveled playing field. But there's a lot of hoops. It's just, this is a long battle coming.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the marathon, not the sprint. And I think that, like you were saying with the chronic stress, I think that also plays in with some of the motivation dying down of, like, you know, when the adrenaline is pumping, when it's, you know, when there's been a video of violence, that's when we're, you know, outraged and we're ready to do something, and then that dies down a lot of times. Yeah.
I mean, it's not sustainable. We know that the protests, they are definitely making an impact, but it's not sustainable. So the real work needs to be with lobbyists. It needs to be with the senators. It needs to be with the communities working together with the systems that are in place, reforming all of them, which I know no one wants to hear. But the reality is racism is intertwined in every system America has created from day one, and that was intentional. And so if we want things to really change, we have to think about a different way of doing things.
Are there ways that you see even social work and therapy needing to change?
You know, I think we need more. There needs to be more of us and more availability to us, as well as we need to be involved in all of the systems. I really love the idea of the police departments having a whole department for mental health providers. There are so many instances where they get calls out where, somebody is having a mental health crisis and they are not equipped or trained to handle that without it turning into something else, whereas we are. And so put us on the team. Put us on the team. We should be in schools. We should be in police stations. We should be everywhere, because we are more equipped to deal with the relational and the mental health piece that comes with life. And I just feel like we should be more accessible and more have more ability to be a part of these systems.
And it made me think of, I know in Pennsylvania, when I moved away, they didn't have some of these regulations in place for continuing ed. Since moving back and renewing my Pennsylvania license, they had put in place stuff around mandated reporting, stuff around assessing for risk. One, I think that would be important moving forward would be a little bit more in terms of cultural competency on a regular basis. Because, like we said, you have the class in grad school, and then that's pretty much it, unless you choose to carve out that niche and really focus on that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, too, there's still a lot of areas and positions that do not have a lot of diversity. And so if you are in a particular profession, there's no reason why the whole boardroom is filled with white people. You need to diversify. And the only way that people are truly going to understand is if you have voices at the table who have input into these things, so that there is a cultural competency aspect of creating policy, creating different regulations. It just needs to be more diverse in most of these high places.
Again, it made me think of, just our work together, and, just the lack of resources, lack of professionals in the field, especially for, let me actually, this is bad radio, but I would say possibly one of our Shardae and I had a colleague in terms of African American males in the mental health field. James, we're talking about you. But yeah, again, it was like almost unheard of. Like it's so few.
It still is. Oh my goodness, having males generally in this field is like seeing a unicorn.
Yeah.
It's so needed. That is the diversity that needs to happen, as well as having more LGBT, people from their community involved in more of these professions being accepted. Like, we all need to be able to see somebody and say, oh, I see myself in them, then I can do this. I can be a lawyer because I see Kamala Harris was one. I can be the president because I saw Obama. Mm-hmm. The importance of having diversity and having multiple different views at the table that encompass what this country actually looks like is so important.
Yeah, Shardae, thank you so much for being willing to have these conversations, and probably should have said this at the beginning, but obviously this is, we could have talked for weeks and weeks and weeks and still not scratch the surface on this. It's an ongoing conversation that needs to keep happening. I would love if you want to come back on, but I definitely hope to continue to have some of these conversations and others, whether that's in the Asian community or in the Hispanic community. One of the things that challenged me was there was another podcast that I listened to where the guest basically said, if you have a podcast, like, look at your guest list. And for me, it was like all white. Other than the episode that you and I recorded, and I'm hoping I haven't left somebody out. I'm trying to, like, go through the Rolodex in my mind right now of, like, but I'm pretty sure it was, pretty much it. Of, like, okay, it needs to change. It seems so stupid of, like, it's a podcast. But that idea of, like, even some small changes like that may not be that small.
Right. I mean, I think it's a big step, because you get different points of view from different walks of life. And so, no, I don't think it's stupid at all. I think it's a great step.
Oh, hopefully it makes a dent. And like you said, getting different perspectives, getting different messages out there. So a lot of times I'll ask this question to end. I mean, we may have already answered this, but if you were, I don't know, president of mental health for the country, or, some big role like that, are there any other changes that you'd make other than the ones we've already been talking about, with more diversity and changing and reform?
What would I do?
It's quite the runway. Go.
It is. That's a big question. What else would I do other than put us in every profession?
Uh-huh.
I think having more training others, training teachers, training various people that have to interact with other folks would be on the top of my list. Because I think mental health is such a big part of our lives that I think for years we've neglected. I think having more of an emphasis on mental health and things that ensures that, everybody has the accessibility to a therapist if they need one. Everybody has knowledge of how to, get to a therapist, or, every teacher will have some tools in their toolbox to deal with a kid that might have some challenge, or multiple kids in their classroom who have challenges. I think training is important. I think I would absolutely love to, see more emphasis as a whole for mental health. I want that to be a priority in America. So, yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
You got to run for office for.
Oh, no, thank you. For that.
Well, and I guess to throw in at the end, have you seen a shift in that in Black and Brown community of gravitating more towards mental health services and trying to reach out for that? Have you seen that more?
Yeah, I definitely think that people have accepted it. I don't think that's a real word, but I think people have more acceptance around it. The negative connotation of what that means has shifted a lot. People are recognizing that, mental health and therapy is not just because, you're crazy or something's wrong with you. So I definitely see so many people that probably would not have tried to reach out maybe 20 years ago. I definitely think there's more of an acceptance around it. So if we can keep that ball rolling.
There you go. Yes. Man. So where can people find you? Yeah, if they want to get a training or get in touch with you, yeah.
Okay, yes. So people can find me. I have a website, swashingtoncounselingllc.com. I am Google. You can Google me, Shardae Washington, LMFT, Richmond, Virginia. You can find all my contact information on there. Yes. Yep. Those would be the main two, or Psychology Today.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, and I always tell people I'll have that in the show notes if you're, driving or working out or whatever. So I will make sure that people can get to you. Again, thank you so much for braving coming back on a second time. And I would love to have you on for a third, fourth time, fifth time. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm always down.
Yeah, there you go. Well,
thank you so much.
Take care.
You too.
And there you have it, folks. Yet another episode done and in the books. Thank you, as always, for stopping by and checking out the show. I hope from this episode you do some of your own research. Kind of like Shardae and I were talking during the conversation. That idea of do your own research. Check out some books. Check out some interviews or blog posts. Just learn something. Put some effort into it and see where it takes you. Have some of those conversations. That there are so many people that, they don't have much experience with other cultures or other races, and asking some of those questions of what has been your previous experience with other races or with racism. How did your life, your experiences growing up, how did that shape your views? And, starting to really look at some of those things. And then the next question of what can I do with that? Like Shardae was saying, that may not be like, okay, I have to go up to every person of a different race and apologize to them. That's not what they're asking for. That's not what they want. And some of that, okay, so how can I make an impact? Is that just through my parenting and what I teach my child and what I model to them? Is that, my interactions with coworkers or in my community, in my place of worship or other areas? And like I said earlier, that idea of trying to come at this topic from a place of respect and from a place of still needing to learn, still needing to grow. Honestly, I think that's all of us. But I hope that you do some of that work because it does impact all of us. It makes a huge difference in our community, whether that's the global community or just the community in the area that you live. It makes a difference. So take that for what it's worth. Thanks for stopping by. Well, if you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're catching this podcast. You can check out detailed show notes and any other resources given in the show at www.pfsonthecouch.com. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming episodes, guests, or contribute questions to the show, be sure to follow along on any of your favorite social media platforms. The author and host of this podcast is not engaged in a therapeutic relationship with the listener and cannot give counseling advice without a confidential appointment. Listeners should be sure to consult with a licensed therapist in their area or seek emergency medical attention if they are experiencing psychological difficulty. A special thanks to the band The Topsy-Turvies for the show theme song. Their song, Like a Living Dead, can be found at topsyturvies.bandcamp.com. The bump interview track was the song 1973 by Bruno E. The author and host of this podcast is John Dennis. Special thanks to show editor Casey Lehman and show producer Trevor Groff.